What I'm holding is a piece of local candy called a melifin. It's a small oblong piece of taffy. Once you unwrap it, it looks not unlike a tooth suspended in amber. The actual process of making melifin comes from a tradition of ancient China called the creation of the melifin man, wherein they would mummify a cherished elder in honey. As he knew his end was approaching, they would take him and place him in a basin of honey, and then they would feed him nothing but honey until the entirety of his internal digestive system was full of it, at which point they would lay him down and drown him in it. The honey would arrest normal decomposition, and various biological changes would begin to occur. Bones would become jelly-like. Calcium would break down. Crystals of sugar and sugar-like extracts would begin to form on the surface. And after it had been left to cure for about 100 years, they would part it out and sell it as candy that would heal broken bones. I say bon appetit. These are dark times, and these stories come from very dark places. Good evening, listeners. My name is Jonas Armitage, and you're here for Stories for Dark Places. On tonight's show, we're going to embrace a piece of literature from H.P. Lovecraft, a man of questionable moral value but of undeniable literary skill, without whom I would not even be possible today. So thank you for that, Howard. As well, we'll be talking about a possible change in the show's dynamic. You see, we are struggling with finances here. We appreciate our sponsors as they've come to us, but the cost of running a radio station is quite severe. So we are considering renting out the space part-time to another group that would like to run a local program. This would mean that Stories from Dark Places would become a once every other week broadcast. Although this would permit us to make the shows larger, have more content, perhaps a few stories, more guest hosts, some extra content. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear your opinion. Reach out to us at Twitter and storiesfordar1, or email us at storiesfromdarkplaces@gmail.com. Now, without further ado, next we'll be having our story From Beyond by H.P. Lovecraft. But first, a message from our sponsors. Do your friends and family members keep departing the mortal coil into the sweet release of death and the glorious unknowableness that is Dagon and the Elder Gods? Are you busy with work and home life and just can't find the time to handle their affairs? Then call Bob's Coffins and Plots. Bob Shipley has been a member of the Innsmouth community for over 60 years, and he believes that things like death and funerals are best left to the experts, and no one in Innsmouth knows more about death than Bob. Bob's Coffins and Plots. Let Bob handle your dead loved ones.
Are you itching for a good story? Laughter among friends, maybe a mystery? Firebreathing Kittens is a standalone Dungeons & Dragons podcast. Each episode is a separate 3-hour-long story, like a movie, for your ears. You can listen to these adventures in any order. Join us on a real play D&D quest as we solve mysteries, attempt comedic banter, and enjoy friendship. Firebreathing Kittens podcast. Fantasy, action, mystery, and friendship.
Horrible beyond conception was the change which had taken place in my best friend, Crawford Tillinghast. I had not seen him since that day, 2.5 months before, when he told me toward what goal his physical and metaphysical researches were leading. When he had answered my odd and almost frightened remonstrances by driving me from his laboratory and his house in a burst of fanatical rage. I had known that he now remained mostly shut in the attic laboratory with that accursed electrical machine, eating little and excluding even the servants. But I had not thought that a brief period of 10 weeks could so alter and disfigure any human creature. It is not pleasant to see a stout man suddenly grown thin, and it is even worse when the baggy skin becomes yellowed or grayed, the eyes sunken, circled, and uncannily glowing, the forehead veined and corrugated, and the hands tremulous and twitching. And if added to this there be a repellent unkemptness, a wild disorder of dress, a bushiness of dark hair white at the roots, and an unchecked growth of white beard on a face once clean-shaven, the cumulative effect is quite shocking. But such was the aspect of Crawford Tillinghast on the night his half-coherent message brought me to his door after my weeks of exile. Such was the spectre that trembled as it admitted me, candle in hand, and glanced furtively over its shoulder as if fearful of unseen things in the ancient, lonely house set back from Benevolent Street. That Crawford Tillinghast should ever have studied science and philosophy was a mistake. These things should be left to the frigid and impersonal investigator, for they offer two equally tragic alternatives to the man of feeling and action: despair if he fail in his quest, and terrors unutterable and unimaginable if he succeeded. Tillinghast had once been the prey of failure, solitary and melancholy. But now I knew, with nauseating fears of my own, that he was the prey of success. I had indeed warned him 10 weeks before, when he burst forth with his tale of what he felt himself about to discover. He had been flushed and excited then, talking in a high and unnatural, though always pedantic voice. "What do we know," he said, "of the world and the universe about us? Our means of receiving impressions are absurdly few, and our notions of surrounding objects infinitely narrow. We see things only as we are constructed to see them, and can gain no idea of their absolute nature. With 5 feeble senses we pretend to comprehend the boundlessly complex cosmos, yet other beings with wider, stronger, or different range of senses might not only see very differently the things we see, but might see and study whole worlds of matter, energy, and life, which lie close at hand yet can never be detected with the senses we have. I have always believed that such strange, inaccessible worlds exist at our very elbows, and now I believe I have found a way to break down the barrier. I am not joking. Within 24 hours that machine at the table will generate waves acting on unrecognized sense organs that exist in us as atrophied or rudimentary vestiges. Those waves will open up to us many vistas unknown to man and several unknown to anything we consider organic life. We shall see that at which dogs howl in the dark, and what at which cats prick up their ears after midnight. We shall see things, and other things which no breathing creature has yet seen. We shall overlap time, space, and dimensions, and without bodily motion peer to the bottom of creation." When Tillinghast said these things, I remonstrated, for I knew him well enough to be frightened rather than amused. But he was a fanatic, and drove me from that house. Now he was no less a fanatic, but his desire to speak had conquered his resentment, and he had written me imperatively in hand I could scarcely recognize. As I entered the abode of the friend so suddenly metamorphosed to a shivering gargoyle, I became infected with the terror which seemed stalking in all the shadows. The words and beliefs expressed 10 weeks before seemed bodied forth in the darkness beyond the small circle of candlelight, and I sickened at the hollow, altered voice of my host. I wished the servants were about, and did not like it when he said they had all left 3 days previously. It seemed strange that old Gregory, at least, would desert his master without telling as tried a friend as I. It was he who had given me all the information I had of Tillinghast after I was repulsed in rage. Yet I soon subordinated all fears to my growing curiosity and fascination. Just what Crawford Tillinghast now wished of me I could only guess, but that he had some stupendous secret or discovery to impart I could not doubt. Before I had protested at his unnatural pryings into the unthinkable. Now that he had evidently succeeded to some degree, I almost shared his spirit, terrible though the cost of victory appeared. Up through the dark emptiness of the house I followed the bobbing candle in the hand of this shaking parody of man. The electricity seemed to be turned off, and when I asked my guide, he said it was for a definite reason. "It would be too much. I would not dare," he continued to mutter. Especially noted his new habit of muttering, for it was not like him to talk to himself. We entered the laboratory in the attic, and I observed that detestable electrical machine glowing with a sickly, sinister, violent luminosity. It was connected with a powerful chemical battery, but seemed to be receiving no current, for I recalled that in its experimental stage it sputtered and purred when in action. In reply to my question, Tillinghast muttered that this permanent glow was not electrical in any sense that I could understand. He now seated me near the machine, so that it was on my right, and turned a switch somewhere below the crowning cluster of glass bulbs. The usual sputtering began, turned to a whine, and terminated in a drone so soft as to suggest a return to silence. Meanwhile, the luminosity increased, waned again, then assumed a pale ochre color or blend of colors, which I could neither place nor describe. Tillinghast had been watching me, and noted my puzzled expression. "Do you know what that is?" he whispered. "That is ultraviolet." He chuckled oddly at my surprise. "You thought ultraviolet was invisible, and so it is. But you can see that and many other invisible things now. Listen to me. The waves from that thing are waking 1,000 sleeping senses in us, senses which we inherit from ions of evolution, from the state of detached electrons to the state of organic humanity. I have seen the truth, and I intend to show it to you. Do you wonder how it will seem? I will tell you." Here Tillinghast seated himself directly opposite me, blowing out his candle and staring hideously into my eyes. "Your existing sense organs, ears first, I think, will pick up many of the impressions, for they are closely connected with the dormant organs. Then there will be others. You have heard of the pineal gland? I laugh at the shallow endocrinologist, fellow dupe and fellow parvenu of the Freudian. That gland is a great sense organ of organs, I have found out. It is like sight in the end, and transmits visual pictures to the brain. If you're normal, that is the way you ought to get most of it. Get most from the evidence from beyond." I looked about the immense attic room with the sloping south wall, dimly lit by the rays which the everyday eye cannot see. The far corners were all shadows, and the whole place took on a hazy unreality which obscured its nature and invited the imagination to symbolism and phantasm. During the interval that Tillinghast was long silent, I fancied myself in some vast incredible temple of long-dead gods, some vague edifice of innumerable black stone columns reaching up from a floor of damp slabs to a cloudy height beyond the range of my vision. The picture was very vivid for a while, but gradually gave way to a more horrible conception, that of utter, absolute solitude in infinite, sightless, soundless space. There seemed to be a void, and nothing more, and I felt a childish fear which prompted me to draw from my hip pocket a revolver I carried after dark since the night I was held up in East Providence. Then, from the furthermost regions of remoteness, the sound softly glided into existence. It was infinitely faint, subtly vibrant, and unmistakably musical, but held a quality of surpassing wildness, which made its impact feel like a delicate torture of my whole body. I felt sensations like those one feels when accidentally scratching ground glass. Simultaneously, there developed something like a cold draught, which apparently swept past me from the direction of the distant sound. As I waited breathlessly, I perceived that both sound and wind were increasing, the effect being to give me an odd notion of myself as tied to a pair of rails in the path of a gigantic approaching locomotive. I began to speak to Tillinghast, and as I did so, all the unusual impressions abruptly vanished. I saw only the man, the glowing machines, and the dim apartment. Tillinghast was grinning repulsively at the revolver, which I had almost unconsciously drawn, but from his expression I was sure he had seen and heard as much as I, if not a great deal more. I whispered what I had experienced, and he bade me to remain as quiet and receptive as possible. "Don't move," he cautioned. "For in these rays we are able to be seen as well as to see. I told you the servants left, but I didn't tell you how. It was that thick-witted housekeeper. She turned on the lights downstairs after I had warned her not to, and the wires picked up sympathetic vibrations. It must have been frightful. I could hear the screams up here, in spite of all that I was seeing and hearing from another direction. And later, it was rather awful to find those empty heaps of cloth around the house. Mrs. Updike's clothes were close to the front hall switch. That's how I know she did it. It got them all. But so long as we don't move, we're fairly safe. Remember, we're dealing with a hideous world in which we are practically helpless. Keep still." The combined shock of the revelation and of the abrupt command gave me a kind of paralysis, and in my terror my mind again opened to the impressions coming from what Tillinghast called beyond. I was now in a vortex of sound and motion, with confused pictures before my eyes. I saw the blurred outlines of the room, but from some point in space there seemed to be pouring a seething column of unrecognizable shapes or clouds, penetrating the solid roof at a point ahead and to the right of me. Then I glimpsed the temple-like effect again, but this time the pillars reached up into an aerial ocean of light, which sent down one blinding beam along the path to the cloudy column I had seen before. After that, the scene was almost wholly kaleidoscopic, and in the jumble of lights and sounds and unidentified sense impressions, I felt that I was about to dissolve, or in some way lose solid form. One definite flash I shall always remember. I seemed for an instant to behold a patch of strange night sky filled with shining, revolving spheres, and as it receded, I saw that the glowing suns formed a constellation, or galaxy, or settled shape, this shape being the distorted face of Crawford Tillinghast. At another time I felt the huge, animate things brush past me, and occasionally walking or drifting through my supposedly solid body, and thought I saw Tillinghast look at them, as though his better-trained senses could catch them visually. I recalled what he had said of the pineal gland, and wondered what he saw with his preternatural eye. Suddenly I myself became possessed of a kind of augmented sight. Over and above the luminous and shadowy chaos arose a picture which, though vague, held the elements of consistency and permanence. It was indeed somewhat familiar, for the unusual part was superimposed upon the usual terrestrial scene, much as a cinema view may be thrown upon the painted curtain of a theater. I saw the attic laboratory, the electrical machine, and the unsightly form of Tillinghast opposite me. But of all the space unoccupied by familiar objects, not one particle was vacant. Indescribable shapes, both alive and otherwise, were mixed in disgusting disarray, and close to every known thing were whole worlds of alien, unknown entities. It likewise seemed that all the known things entered into the composition of other unknown things and vice versa. Foremost among the living objects were inky, jellyfish monstrosities, which flabbily quivered in harmony with the vibrations from the machine. They were present in loathsome profusion, and I saw to my horror that they overlapped. They were semi-fluid and capable of passing through one another, and through what we know as solids. These things were never still, but seemed ever floating about with some malignant purpose. Sometimes they appeared to devour one another, the attacker launching itself at its victim and instantaneously obliterating the latter from sight. Shudderingly, I felt that I knew what had obliterated the unfortunate servants, and could not exclude the things from my mind as I strove to observe other properties from the newly visible world that lied unseen around us. But Tillinghast had been watching me, and was speaking. "You see them! You see them! You see the things that float and flop about you and through your every moment of your life? You see the creatures that form what men call the pure air and the blue sky? Have I not succeeded in breaking down the barrier? Have I not shown you worlds that no other living men have seen?" I heard his screams through the horrible chaos, and looked at that wild face thrust so offensively close to mine. His eyes were pits of flame, and they glared at me with what I now saw was overwhelming hatred. The machine droned detestably. "You think those floundering things wiped out the servants? Fool, they're harmless, but the servants are gone, aren't they? You tried to stop me. You discouraged me when I needed every drop of encouragement I could get. You were afraid of the cosmic truth, you damned coward, but now I've got you. What swept up the servants? What made them scream so loud? Don't know. You'll know soon enough. Look at me! Listen to what I say. Do you suppose that there are really any such things as time and magnitude? Do you fancy there are such things as form or matter? I tell you, I have struck depths that your little brain can't picture. I have seen beyond the bounds of infinity, and drawn down demons from the stars. I have harnessed the shadows that stride from world to sow death and madness. Space belongs to me, do you hear? Things are hunting me now, the things that devour and dissolve, but I know how to elude them. It is you they will get, as they got the servants. Stirring, dear sir. I told you it was dangerous to move. I have saved you so far by telling you to keep still, saved you to see more sights and to listen to me. If you had moved, they would have been at you long ago. Don't worry, they won't hurt you. They didn't hurt my servants. It was the seeing that made the poor devils scream so. My pets are not pretty, for they come out of places where aesthetic standards are very different. Disintegration is quite painless, I assure you. But I want you to see them. I almost saw them, but I knew how to stop. You were curious. I always knew you were no scientist. Trembling with anxiety to see the ultimate things I have discovered. Why don't you move then? Tired? Well, don't worry, my friend, for they are coming. Look, curse you, look, it's just over your left shoulder. What remains to be told is very brief, and may be familiar to you from the newspaper accounts. The police heard a shot in the old Tillinghast house, and found us there. Tillinghast dead, and me unconscious. They arrested me because the revolver was in my hand, but released me in 3 hours after they found it was apoplexy which had finished Tillinghast, and saw that my shot had been directed at the noxious machine which now lay hopelessly shattered on the laboratory floor. I did not tell very much of what I had seen, for I feared the coroner would be skeptical, but from the evasive outline I did give, the doctor told me that I had undoubtedly been hypnotized by a vindictive and homicidal man. I wish I could believe the doctor. It would help my shaking nerves if I could dismiss what I now have to think of the air and the sky about and above me. I never feel alone or comfortable, and a hideous sense of pursuit sometimes comes chillingly on me when I'm weary. What prevents me from believing the doctor is one simple fact. The police never found the bodies of those servants whom they say Crawford Tillinghast murdered.
Soul crystals not pure enough? Spirit writing journals too smeared? Holy water looking murky? Then come to Verboten Knickknacks and Collectables, home of the largest collection of arcane artifacts, cursed objects, and unearthly articles since the Pines Cryptid Museum disappeared with the rest of Ashley, Kansas. Hi, this is Kai the Intern. I wanted to tell you that Verboten Knickknacks and Collectables has everything you could ever want. Whether you're a disciple of the Mad Arab himself, or a curious teenager looking to summon your first shock off. I just bought a new corpse candle last week and it still looks new. You'd never know I'd summoned the dead twice this week already. Verboten Knickknacks and Collectables, where the only thing you can't find is a bloated price tag.
Hello, listeners. Looking for more tales to entertain with esoteric delight and supernatural suspense? I would encourage you to check out Peculiar Stories. Join Indiana Beckett as she takes you on a walk around her particular side of the neighborhood in all things strange and unusual. You may find her on Anchor Podcasts or anywhere that your podcast can be found. Oh, I do so love H.P. Lovecraft. The man was a bigot, a misanthropist, a generally unpleasant human being as far as I know, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a gifted writer. The things he put onto the page inspired people for generations. In fact, as well as there being a movie based on tonight's story, there are close to 100 other ones, as well as tabletop RPG games, video games, metal bands, and music in general, from 2005 to the modern era, as far back as 1969. Amazing. I guess it goes to show that you don't have to be a decent human being to make decent things, and to lead other people on to be extraordinary after the fact. Anyway, that's all the time we have for tonight. I would like to thank our sponsors, those who subscribe to us on YouTube, Anchor, or wherever else your podcast can be found, as well as those of you who tune in every night to listen just because you can. We appreciate you most of all for listening, going out of your way to join us to share the story and the experience. Please, we would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about the idea of a change in programming? Again, you can find us on Twitter at storiesfordar1 or at storiesfromdarkplaces@gmail.com. Please reach out. We would love to hear from you first. Good night, listeners. And please remember, when you've been staring at that book for far too long into the hours of the night, you feel that prickling sense of dread, and swear that something is just beyond the line of your sight. Remember, there's nothing to be afraid of. After all, some of the best things only happen in the dark.
Stories from Dark Places was recorded before an imaginary studio audience. All stories performed on this podcast have express written consent from the original author. Jonas Armitage, his studio manager, and the entire staff of WZHP Radio Innsmouth are fictitious characters, and it's probably for the best that you continue to believe that.